Who's timing?
Oh, I
Who's
am.
Okay.
All right, let me reset. All right, go.
My name is Julian Refutation, and I will be responding to the claim that under the current presidential election system, your vote rarely impacts the outcome. My opponent's secondary claims were that who wins each state is for the most part determined based on party or state loyalty. My opponent's secondary claim is that in theory an elector can vote whichever way she wishes, essentially if you are the winning party, giving your vote to someone else to decide for you. My opponent's third secondary claim I was a little confused on, but states that despite that electors are not punished for breaking their pledge, that they have not changed a presidential outcome yet, and that this poses a problem for the losing party because after losing your vote, in essence, becomes wasted. And my opponent's fourth secondary claim is that it is possible for the Electoral College not to reflect the popular vote. Responding to my opponent's first secondary claim, I will say that whoever wins each state is not determined simply by party loyalty, but by the voters themselves who may or may not be loyal to a certain party. The example of California, which my opponent pointed out, voting Democrat in the past 20 years simply means that the people of California have held beliefs similar to the Democratic Party for the past 20 years, and that no one forces Californians to vote a certain way. It's just that the Californians individually have decided that they identify better with the Democratic Party. And that according to an article in Gallup Politics from 2008 to 2010, California's registered Democratic population has decreased 5%, leaving California with only 14% more Democrats than Republicans, showing that California is not a solely Democratic state, despite how Democrats may have won California in elections over the past 20 years, making that occurrence more an anomaly. My response to my opponent's second secondary claim is that though electors may vote however they choose, they themselves are put into office by United States citizens in their state, as is stated in Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution. They're voted in the same way that state senators and representatives are, showing that people matter in voting, and that showing that people control the electors who control the election in turn, somewhat. A democratic republic, by definition, does not mean that citizens directly control all issues, such as lawmaking, but instead, state and heavily influence government politicians, who are basically the middlemen for politics, who resolve and control different issues. An article in the Christian Science Monitor points out that the majority opinion is only temporary and liable to change, and such is why there is a separation of powers between people voting and the Electoral College voting. The article points at Grover Cleveland, who won the popular election based on his dominance in the South after the Civil War, which has a higher population, but lost the Electoral College vote and thereby the election based on that he did not appeal to politicians, only the citizens. Such an example is the demonstration of separation of powers at work, preventing the strictly Southern win and forcing Cleveland to adjust his politics to appeal more than to just the Southern population. My response to my opponent's third secondary claim is that by definition, if one is to vote for a candidate that ends up losing, one's vote becomes useless. However, it is not disclosed at the time of voting who is to win or lose, and so there's an equal chance that one's vote becomes useful or useless in elections, demonstrating equality between voters. Also to be pointed out is that even though one's vote does not go to a candidate if a candidate loses, it is denied from the winning candidate, basically meaning that the winning candidate does not have one's vote out of a set number of the population to increase the numbers. Again, there is an equality created in that this rule is applied to all candidates. My response to my opponent's fourth secondary claim is that while it is possible for the Electoral College to not reflect the popular vote, and it has occurred with 14 presidents, this is actually 31% of the 44 presidents rather than the 42% my opponent stated, and that the Electoral College is more representative to smaller states' point of view, as is stated by a Credo reference article. The Electoral College win over the popular vote win is also what put presidents like Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy into office, who were major influence and changers of American policy in a way that the majority of American citizens definitely agree with. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, you identified the main and secondary claims, so it's pretty easy to follow the argument and see where all of your responses apply. You got a good counterclaim on the first point. You've got a couple of statistics to show that, in fact, that there are changes. I'm not sure that it's particularly convincing, but the fact is that I think you've got a good premise here that it's basically the voters who decide where it leans. It's not the political parties themselves that dominate. It's the voters' decision as to how they want to commit to those political parties. And I think that's a reasonable explanation of the issue there. The signpost on the second point, again, your transition is relatively clear. You make an argument about the electors being selected by the people, but I didn't really hear any information on that from either you or from the advocate on that point, so I didn't think it was very clear. The explanation about how it's a republic as opposed to a direct democracy, that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm not exactly sure, though, how it applies to this issue. The idea that vote comes down, you got an equal chance of having an impact on the election. I think that may, in fact, ignore some of the data that the advocate presented on the Electoral College. But again, having not heard that argument recently, I think that's a little bit harder to figure out. I did like kind of the counterclaim that you have here, that in essence you're denying a vote, even if your vote doesn't affect the win, it denies the vote to the winning candidate, and there's some consequence to that. I think that's an interesting idea there. Why it's important is not particularly explained. I think that there could be an argument there, but it needs a little bit more development. And again, the label as you get to the fourth point is very clear, so everything's organized very well. You're basically conceding there's maybe a slight dispute about what the percentages represent, that the Electoral College could result in a different outcome than the popular vote. The premise here is that the popular vote is important. I think this is one of those places where you go back to talking about how it's a republic rather than a direct democracy, and that there is this whole idea of balance of powers and how the states are supposed to be having an influence on these kinds of things. They don't really get much development of that. Your argument basically comes down to that we lucked out a couple of times with Lincoln and Kennedy under this system, and it's probably a valid argument to make, but I'm not sure that everybody's going to feel that way, because there may be other examples that go the other direction from people's point of view. I do think that you're reading a little bit too much and it goes a little quickly, so you need to pace yourself more. All right, thank you.